Welcome to our weekly Friday Talk and Tour series when we share the opportunity to visit the studios of our wonderful artists and hear about their works and inspiration. These visits are brought to you by the Duncan McClellan Gallery and the DMG School Project of St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you for joining us.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. So good to see everyone. We have an exciting show today. We've had an exciting week. Our team has completed a lot of things that I'm really proud of. They did their show out at the Creative Pinellas with Rob Stern, gave a lecture, had a sold out etching class, and had a great exhibition and demonstration. Today, Lauren Hill and Dan and Danielle all produced a film and that was used for 40 different schools through a science fair with USF. DMG was able to reach 1,000 students today, and we're really excited about what the kids learned and the questions they asked, and we're hoping to replicate this in a larger format around the country. But today we're really excited to have one of our own, Dan Alexander. And Dan applied for a residency program. As you know, DMG has a residency program. And not only was he a fantastic glassblower, but we really liked him. And he's been a real asset. He started in March officially. And we're really glad to have him not only at DMG, but here today, because I think you'll really think his work is fascinating and how he got here. So Mary, if you'll take it away and launch this thing.
Thanks, Duncan. It really is so exciting to see the development of the DMG School Project and all the great new things they're doing. It's really wonderful and shows so much promise, and everyone, Lauren, Dan, Danielle, everyone involved has done such an amazing job. A few housekeeping things before we start. When Dan starts his video, if you want to click on speaker view, you'll get to see him larger than everyone else as he narrates the film. And also, if you have questions and comments, you can use the chat button in the bottom center of your screen, and we'll field them to Dan as he goes along. So thank you for joining us. Dan's one of the rising stars of the contemporary glass world, and we're so lucky to have him come to the team as our gallery as our hot shop director. And you know, he, as Duncan says, he came as a resident artist, and we were just all blown away by his professionalism, the quality of his work, and you'll see through his presentation how he got to where he is, and we know that he'll go much further. So Dan, we're going to introduce you, and when you're ready, share your screen. Everyone, please feel free to comment and ask Dan questions. I think you're going to really love this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for the great introduction. Here, I'll see if I can bring this up. You can let me know.
Got
it started here? It's looking okay?
Yeah. Excellent.
Great. Well, thanks for the great introduction. Yeah, I was very fortunate to be part of the residency program at DMG this past fall. And they think that I was fortunate to be there. And I think that they just couldn't get rid of me. I stayed there through the residency, and then decided that I really like the shop, like the gallery and the team. And then I'm very fortunate to become part of the St. Pete glass community. So thank you again for the introduction. So we're going to get started here. So some of you may be familiar with some of my more recent work. I've traveled to a lot of different glass studios kind of all around the world and worked with a number of different artists. So one of the first questions I get to all the new studios that I go to is, when did you first start blowing? So I went back through my archive trying to find the earliest documented photo, and I came across this was me. That was when I first realized I had some talent. So this was just kind of an icebreaker to get started. So I have been blowing glass over 16 years now. I'm from Northeast Ohio, a small town called Pierpont, Ohio, that even people from Ohio aren't familiar with that. So I started towards the end of high school. I've always been into making and creating and taking art throughout high school. So after high school, I kind of fell into glass blowing, and then realized that I could take it as a college university to get a degree in glass. So I traveled to Kent State, where I became a glass blower. So while in school, after my first semester, I declared glass as my major, and I volunteered for several months at a studio close by called Hale Farm and Village. So that is an early American reproduction glass studio. So I volunteered there on the weekends. And then I went through school Monday through Thursday was my classes, and I worked at the reproduction glass factory every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So that was my weekend job in college. So I did that for the first several years. These are some of the items, similar items that I was producing. So these were little flasks. I had a number of other items I made, and I just pretty much made the same thing over and over again. Which was good, especially in the very beginning years of learning how to make glass. If you've ever tried it, you may see that just the dexterity and learning how to keep the glass on the pipe can be difficult in the beginning stages. So doing some of these very little bottles and things like that over and over again, I've made thousands of these at this point. I really got some of the foundation building skills when I was just learning. So I also had the conceptual background from art school, and technical glassmaking from production background. So these were some of the old bottles that I made. This, I think, was my first year of blowing glass, so I wanted to throw in a few of the throwback photos. So this was, once again, just some of the production line from them. So at Kent State, it was more of a conceptual glass program. We did have, it was mainly based around, I would say, kiln casting. I was one of the, I would say, few artists that came out of the program that was focused on the hot shop side of glassworking. So it actually worked in my favor when I was an undergrad, because we always brought in a number of different established artists to help out with the more technical side of glass blowing. So being a glass blower in the program, I was always paired up to help a lot of these artists coming through. So this was Ross Richmond. We had Davide Salvadori. This was probably after I was blowing glass, maybe 2 years. Ilio. Once again, this is Ilio, a master cup maker who passed away a few years ago. I was fortunate to work with Nick Mount for 2 weeks. That was back when I had long hair. That got cut shortly after, I think. And I also ended up writing a study abroad that I got a credited course to go to Italy. And I got to go to a number of different factories over there, I believe my sophomore year of college. So this was with Pino Signoretto. So I was still doing some technical glass blowing while in undergrad, but I couldn't really turn that work in for a project. So some of the work that I was turning in for projects was more mixed media and more conceptual. So growing up on a dairy farm and crop farm in Northeast Ohio, I drew my upbringing for a lot of inspiration. So this was a piece my junior year of college. It was titled When in Season, and it was all based upon seasonal change, and we had different crops. So the glass pods was kind of to resemble an hourglass. So as this, it is kinetic as well. So as the object turned in the space, you would see the tops, the crops, seed, and our feed for the animals kind of go from one side of the capsule to the other, once again referencing seasonal change and just changing of the season for crops and feed. So this was my senior year in college. This was my senior show. I ended up taking a lot of art history classes, and I was really, really interested in artifacts at that time. So I drew inspiration for pretty much old tools is what I was looking at, tools and possibly weapons. And this was my show. It was blown glass, steel, and carved wood. So once again, all mixed media at this point. Kind of a close-up so you can see, I guess, the marriage of materials, so how all of them were assembled. So I guess it was the winter break in college, I applied for a position that was new at that time at the Corning Museum of Glass. And I got interviewed in this winter break. So I ended up getting hired at the Corning Museum of Glass for a new program they were starting. And I immediately after college went to Corning, New York, and started my new job there. So it was doing demonstrations and lecturing about the history of glass to the public. So these were some of my demo pieces. This one in particular, that day I went to a botanical gardens and I was inspired by a pitcher plant. So this was kind of my interpretation of that. So while I was working for them, something that was really good at that point in time is that I didn't have a set production line. So I could kind of make whatever I wanted. So I was mainly focusing on technical glass blowing, looking at form and trying to build technique at this time. I ventured away from the conceptual work in college to kind of just refine my skills. So in the beginning, I was making a lot of larger work, which at that point in time for the museum, it was good for them because they needed people who were skilled in that. So I started to get almost a little bit of a reputation that he was the guy who worked at Corning that made the big stuff. So it's not a bad reputation to have, but I also wanted to be not only the guy who makes the big stuff. So this was probably, I think the first summer there, so I was maybe blowing glass at 5 years at this point. So I knew that I could make the larger scale work, but I wanted to be very well-rounded. So after having this reputation, I wanted to be the artist who could also make thin, delicate work as well. So I took the next few years, still making the large scale work, but also focusing more on detailed work, like wine glasses and goblets. I took a number of classes with Davide Fouine, James Mongrain, Michael Shunke, trying to refine a more technical, fine, detailed skill that I could add to my repertoire that I could use for other techniques in the future. So working for the museum, I was actually blowing glass on cruise ships for a large period of time. So this was a wine glass I made on the ship with a flower. This was something I saw Elio make back when I was in college. And what's nice about working with all these different artists and seeing these demos throughout your career is at that point in time when I saw him create this goblet, something similar, I didn't have the skill to create this goblet with all these different parts. So I kind of am always drawn back upon techniques that I might have learned years ago. And then I can actually use those tools that I've learned later on. Large goblet, lots of bits. Thank you, whoever assisted me with this one. So I went through a goblet phase, and then I also went into, once again, a sculpting phase, trying to complete this full circle of being able to make large scale work, fine, delicate work, and also sculpture. So these are solid sculpted. The shovel, I believe, is around 32 inches long. So they are all solid sculpted glass, going back to kind of almost what my senior thesis was, but revisiting it with only glass and taking out the wood components. So this was the one of the cruise ships I worked on when I worked for Corning. So this was in the fjords in Norway. So the glass blowing studio is right on the top deck there. So that was my office. Not a bad view for my office, huh? So working on the ship, I traveled kind of all around the world. I tried to make it a point to, if there was a glass blowing studio in an area that I was in, trying to visit it and see the local makers. So this was in Istanbul, Turkey at the glass furnace. And throughout my travels, I was always drawn to using my travels as inspiration. So wherever I was at in the world, I would try to draw inspiration for work that I'm creating now. So I would look at a lot of architecture, mosaics, coral, sometimes even just the color of nature, just the sun setting over water. I might make a piece just as an influence. That was the Blue Lagoon in Iceland. So I traveled kind of all over and then drawing inspiration from all of these travels. And now I'm to the point that I'm looking at these old photos and figuring out what I could draw from these and using my, my travels as an inspiration for my current work. This was a sculpture garden in Oslo, Norway. Roatan, I was also doing a lot of snorkeling. So if I was in warm climates, I would definitely be snorkeling in the water, which especially the coral and sea life has influenced my line of work pretty heavily, as you'll see. Something like Santorini, once again, repetition with the colors and patterns, something just like the border of white in the blue windows. I might draw from that as a repetition for the Marini or pattern work I make on a piece. Cobblestone, a lot of mosaics, textiles as well. Anything with repetition, I might see how those came together and how I could use something similar in my work.
So Dan, we have a question, and you may be coming to this. Have you been in the Czech Republic yet?
I have. Let's see. I need to go back. They have the IGS Symposium, I believe, which is a big, similar to the Glass Art Society conference. I believe it's either next year or the following year. But yeah, I am very influenced by the Czech style of working as well, which is completely very different from the Italian style, which a lot of you may be familiar with. Okay. So this was Bora Bora, I believe. So when I wasn't always working, but I still consider this somewhat work because I was still drawing inspiration for my pieces. Sydney Opera House. So if I wasn't relaxing, I went through a phase of trying to do a lot of extreme things. So along with glass blowing, anything that I could kind of live on the edge and get this rush, I was into it. So this was the castle in Dubrovnik. I think I got in trouble and yelled at shortly after jumping off that, but fishing, swimming with stingrays, and also snorkeling, like I mentioned, drawing for inspiration. So in between working on the ships, traveling and teaching, I had a lot of downtime that I ended up being freelance. So I helped out a number of different artists here and there, going to conferences, also making some of my own work. So this was the Glass Boston conference. So this is when the Glass Art Society was going to be there, but was canceled. I still ended up going for a small glass artist get together. I was attacked by this monkey in Gibraltar, so hiking. A number of other artists that I worked for when I was kind of in between jobs at Corning was I helped out Martin Nechke, George Kennard, which is an employee for Corning, who is a huge influence for me. He's taught me a lot about working with large scale glass. I share a number of the same techniques as him as well. This is another one of his pieces. So a very large version, large scale. He's one of the artists in the world who probably makes some of the largest pieces being made today. I was also fortunate to TA for Davide Salvadore at Corning for 3 years in a row. After one of those series, I mentioned wanting to work with him in Italy. So I did end up going back and working with him and his sons in his shop in Murano for 3 months. I think that was around 2014. So I ended up moving on from Corning. I took a position at a studio in St. Louis, Missouri. It was called Third Degree Glass Factory. So it was an event space, a teaching facility, and also a glass blowing studio. It was a public access shop. So I ended up taking on a role for the custom glass and a lot of the production there, along with teaching and managing their facility. So here you can see this was a setup for an event. You can see an installation towards the top that I also helped out with a number of different installations for those orbs or a number of these wall plates. So I ended up working with a number of different designers, which was fun. It was making things that I wouldn't necessarily be making. It was someone else's design. But I never really know what would come across my desk. So matching pieces to a room, which would be site specific. And I did a number of installations at airports, hospitals, and even just clients' personal homes. So a lot of work for that. This was a project I did with a bronze caster that I made the glass balloon. I had a surgeon that wanted me to make a hip replacement out of glass. So the one that I'm holding in the hand there, that was the actual replacement. So that was an interesting one. I also made the Mobile One Driver of the Year award for a few years in a row as well. So it's fun to be part of these projects and seeing my glass being on TV and tons of people cheering on the reciprocant. So it's fun just to be part of jobs like this. So I did kind of somewhat make my own work here and there, trying to still make my work. So I was going through all the techniques like I mentioned before. I would go through the series of 1 week. I'd be like, oh, I want to sculpt glass. So here I am making a sculpted glass bowl. And then the next week I would be like, oh, I should make some wine glasses. So I'm always trying to make sure I stay in touch with all of these skills because I never really know when I'm going to need them. So something I found, especially teaching and traveling around to different studios, is a lot of times you'll see students that will have these amazing ideas of what they want to create out of glass, but they won't have the technical background of how they could do it. So being in touch with all of these skills and keeping them fine-tuned as much as possible, just to make sure that when it comes time that I need them, I still have them on the back burner. This was a commission for a client that wanted an ocean wave inspired shape. So we went through some color options, and that's what we came up with. They wanted a kind of a gradating scale for how it was going to be displayed in their home. I made a series of these shells, once again inspired by the ocean. Being on a cruise ship for a number of years, you have to be inspired by the sand and everything you're around. This was for an interior designer for a client's home. It was a nice series based on just color and form. So I ended up growing my family. So this was my puppy I got 3 years ago. And I know what everyone's saying, these parents and moms, when they say, oh, they grow up so fast, because just in 3 short years, I went from holding him in one hand to this beast now. So now he weighs 130 pounds. He's actually sleeping right next to me. He's a good boy though, but he's been kind of along with me for a wild ride the past few years. We've moved around and he's drove cross country a few times now. So he's a Florida dog. He loves the beach. So several years ago, I was invited to participate in SOFA Chicago. So this was my first exhibition up there. And I was trying to think of what I wanted to make for this. And I was going back to more conceptual work. And I was really inspired by working with Davide and the patterns that we were making there. And while I was living in Murano, the house that I was staying in was someone's grandmother's house who used to collect all these key parts. So every day I was helping Davide and his sons make large-scale Marini work. And then when I go home to where I was staying, they had keys and a lot of pendulums that were literally covering every wall in the house that I was staying in. So I took this idea of my experience there and how could I combine them both together. So I took the color and the Marini patterns from my work environment and combined it with my living arrangement while I was there, being surrounded by these antique key parts. Lino stopped by the booth when I was there. It was nice to see the maestro, the Marini maestro. We did some demo work while at a glass studio up there. This was with John Miller. I did a demo on the Corning stage for 2 years at the SOFA Chicago exhibit as well. So after this first exhibition, I knew I was going to be doing SOFA the following year. And I was kind of tied between 2 different ideas. I've always loved sculpting glass and also making large scale pieces with patterns. So the vessels on the left were all inspired by coral and Marini. And this was kind of a test run of which direction I was going to start focusing and taking my work. So I also did sculpted crows, the cow skull and the gardening set. referencing kind of my upbringing. And I was going to wait for a response to see what the audience thought of each work and which direction I should start pursuing. And I ended up selling both, and depending on who walked through the booth, I got a completely different response. So I kind of was stuck where I was, but it's good to know that people like both of the work that I was making. So the crows, it was kind of a memory of mine and my upbringing, that walking past a barn, we'd always see crows and birds that would be sitting on wires. So being in landlocked in the middle of the country, I was missing the salt water a little bit. So I was always inspired by coral in a lot of my work. So I ended up setting a reef tank and coral tank. So this was my old tank that I ended up taking down, but I started up you can see all the coral in the bottom. So instead of me going to the ocean, I thought it would be a good idea to bring the ocean to me. So a lot of times when I was snorkeling, I get the question a lot of why my pieces are so large. And my thought was that when I'm snorkeling and looking around, a lot of my inspiration comes from things that are small. So I always wanted to be able to see them better. So my idea was taking this small, intricate object that was beautiful, and instead of having to squint and looking at it from far away, I thought if it was larger, it would be a lot easier. So like clownfish, my vessels, I wanted to have this beautiful pattern inspired by something small, but you didn't have to squint and get really close to it to see the beautiful colors. It's something you could see across the room that would be a statement. And especially drawing inspiration from corals, looking at, this is a chart of corals that actually do exist, and it is designer coral. So looking at these, it actually did a lot of the work for me. So I could look at any number of these and I could create something very similar out of glass just by looking at this chart here. So looking at these groupings of coral, to me, that already looks like Marini. So the work and pattern work is kind of already done. Once again, another, this is a zoanthid coral. That's the identification. And here is some Marini that I made. And I'm going to go through some of my inspiration and process here. So I touched base on the corals and inspiration. I was also inspired a lot by tiles and mosaics. I mentioned cobblestone earlier. So looking at something like this, I could draw from the colors and create a pattern, something similar to that. A lot of my patterns, if you look, it's not about the singular Marini by itself. It's about groupings and repetition. So how I create the pattern is I would start off by making one singular cane, which you'll see here. And it's all about layers, especially with Marini. So this cane that I'm going to be stretching in this short video, I thought this might be a lot easier instead of explaining it, that you could have one single color, encase it in clear, and you can see a large diameter of glass will stretch out, sometimes 30 or 40 feet, maybe longer. And it just depends on the ratio of color to clear glass that I want. Each of those will give you a slightly different effect. So this here, you can see how I'm stretching the glass out across the room. After this is stretched out, I would take this long strand of glass, break it up into sections, and that would be one singular cane. So this was all the canes broken up, and then I would roll glass across this, and that would get me a series of canes, which would create the pattern. So this is an example of one of my Marini templates. I would start with the green color rod, and then just go kind of from the front to the back. Each one of those layers will create a series of patterns throughout the whole piece.
Dan, somebody's asking, was that Jack Grumman?
Yeah, that was Jack. We've been buddies for a long time. Yeah, he actually came and helped me this past summer. He helped me for a few weeks. We glass blowers, we say we trade time. So I helped him make some of his work and he helped me make some of mine. So yeah, I've known Jack for a number of years. We're both from Ohio and we still keep in touch. He's going to be visiting sometime in Florida before too long. So great. Yeah, good buddies. So this is would be an example of the exterior layer of pattern. So I started with building up all the color from the inside out, and to get this series of rings around the outside, I would roll the center core across these already made Marini, as you see here. And the important part is getting it to match up exactly, so that your pattern doesn't have a gap. So if your size was wrong or you had something off, if it was too small, your pattern would overlap. If it was too large, you would have a gap in the pattern. So I made sure I chose the video that it worked perfect on. So after you have all of these layers of patterns, I can do a number of different shapes. So this was creating a square or a diamond pattern. So you can take this mass of glass, and just like the cane before, you would stretch this out into a long strand, and then cutting it into a cross section would give the pattern for the piece. So that's melting the glass together, and eventually you end up with a cup and then a piece. So I actually have not completed this piece yet. A lot of times I will save this cup. So I'm probably going to be actually making this piece in the next few weeks. If you want to follow me on Instagram, or maybe we can share it on the Duncan's page and see what this pattern becomes. Feel free to reach out to me or the gallery, because I'm probably going to be making that soon.
That's a great
so
idea.
Did you have a question or no? Okay, so here we have, so I mentioned I can do a number of different shapes. So this was one singular Marini that has a lot going on, and it's not always about one piece. A lot of times it's about the series. So you can see by cutting a lot of those up, I can get quite a number of them, and I could put my mosaic or my pattern a number of different ways depending on how I want it to look. So matching up these shapes, you could see that's putting 6 pieces together will give you a different pattern. And by the time you add in a number of them, you can get that pattern a lot larger. So this was actually inspired by a coral. So when we go to the next slide here, you can kind of see something similar to what I was drawing from inspiration.
So Dan, Suzanne has a question. She asks, how do you make sure the glass is the perfect size before rolling it on the Murini cane? So that pattern you just showed us, how are you able to do that?
It's a lot of practice. There is a little tool that I did have in a previous slide. It's called a pie divider. So it would take the dimensions of a flat plane, and it would give you the exact measurement on a caliber that would be the circumference. So if you took that circumference, laid it out into a flat plane, it would do that math for you. Something that's a little difficult about working with glass is that it's always moving and always changing. So there is a few tricks of how to get that seam to match up perfect, but a lot of it depends on the amount of pressure you apply. So if you're pressing down hard on the glass, it will flatten and make the diameter slightly smaller. So yeah, just lots of practice. That tool helps out a lot. Without that tool, it would make it a lot more difficult.
Well, you make it look so easy, but
yeah, lots of practice. Yeah, and especially with that, the roll-up technique, I end up doing that for creating the pattern and also creating the piece. So we'll look at this one since we have it up. This one piece has 4 roll-ups all on one. So each of these, as the diameter is getting larger, my template's going to get larger as well. So just to create one pattern to make this piece, it would end up being 5 roll-ups by the time you consider rolling the Marini up for the piece. So you got lots of practice in that. This is called an Aiken coral. So I mentioned looking at architecture, corals. I also will look at textiles as well. It's another process that is similar with repetition. They're repeating every stitch over and over again, similar to how I would go through making glass, is doing the same things over. So this is an example of a rug. And I looked at a lot of Turkish rugs for some of my inspiration. So this was actually taking a glass Marini that was made up of glass fibers. So I actually look at this pattern as stitching the pattern together. So this was my mosaic. I would make it into a cup, melting those together. And then another day, I would have the finished product, which would be the stitching inspired by textiles, we'll say. So I still ended up traveling quite a bit. So this was teaching with George Kennard, who I learned a lot from. He was one of my first glassblowing teachers. Yeah, 16 years ago, kind of crazy to think about. So I ended up teaching making large-scale glass with patterns class with him. We've taught together, I believe, 4 times in a row now. The last year, obviously, the class did not go due to COVID, but this was me making one of my pieces. This was at the Corning Museum of Glass while we were teaching. This shape has kind of been really popular. I did it a few times and I got a lot of comments of people saying I nailed it. So it's very beautiful, kind of has nice curves to it. And it also, something I look at is it also shows off the pattern. So a lot of my shapes will change slightly depending on the pattern. I look at the shape of the glass as a canvas to display the very beautiful, intricate Marini work. So last 2 summers ago, I ended up doing a lot of Marini work and production work. I thought it was about time in my cycle to go back to glass sculpting. So I ended up going to the Pilchuk Glass School, and I took a class with Karen Willenbrink and Jason Johnson, which was an amazing class. I've learned a lot. They're very knowledgeable. I think a number of people will say that their experience as Pilchuk was one of the best they've ever had, or best that existed at Pilchuk. I think that when I went there, it wasn't just Karen and Jason being amazing teachers. They also brought in a lot of phenomenal artists. So we got a lot of influence from other artists they brought in. So she had demonstrating artists several days, which were some of them similar to her work and some of them also very different as well. That was a group collaboration. A lot of the students were making small, intricate parts, and this was several days of work. So she brought in Shelley and Rick Allen, Dave Walters was there, and also the Chihuly team came one day. So we had Jason Christian and Dan Friday, a lot of very familiar glass artists. So this is a life-size guitar that Jason sculpted during the class. The Chihuly team, it was great to watch them work. Yeah, Martin Blank, you can see Dale in the back with James Mongrain. And then back to some more work that I was exploring. This was kind of an experimental piece that it was a Grawl mixed with Marini work. I was trying to figure out ways to get more layers of pattern. A technique called Granularity, which is a fiber or threads of colored glass. And now we're getting into more closer to current work. All of these were, majority of them inspired by kind of coral charts or ones that I actually had in my fish tank. So you can see the very beautiful colors, and I was combining kind of that Granularity technique with this, and you can see the very fine stitching around the exterior of the colored glass. This was the piece I showed at SOFA Chicago. This was called Ultra Gold Blasto Musa. It's about 20 by 20 inches high, about 20 inches wide, and about, I believe, 5 inches deep. So I did 3 of these that were all pretty close to the same dimensions. And using this Granularity technique, it also creates a nice negative space. That clear glass will magnify some of the other colors and patterns. So I started to make a few jewelry items. I've always had some of these leftover Marinis that have been floating around. They've been kind of in my pockets, or every once in a while I'd give them to a friend. And then the hot shops were closed down this past year, and I was still trying to find out a way that I could keep working or still moving in a new direction. And I've been asked for years when I was going to make jewelry out of my Marini. So I felt like this was a good time. So I took some of my old Marini and started making some pendants, which were very popular. And what's nice about this with Marini is I can do one long pull, and then I could get a number of different pendants that all match. So if someone wanted a pair or a gift for someone. And some of these were actually pieces that I didn't use or did not fit into a mosaic for a piece exactly. So I still had some extra ones. So I guess a few months ago, we had a show. I ended up showing with Duncan McCullen Gallery at the Selby Gardens, and I was trying to think of some more floral themed pieces, and I ended up coming up with these flowers, and I thought that a lotus flower was what I was working off of. This one looks a little more like a succulent, but I was thinking of a lotus because it has very beautiful colors. I used my own artistic license, so I did alter them some. But I kind of like the idea of that a lotus flower is very beautiful, but if you look at what it grows in some of the muckiest water, the dirtiest water in the world. So I thought it kind of fit for the times right now, that even though it's been a rough year for everyone, it's good to know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and something beautiful can come out of something that's not the most pleasing. So I like the idea of the lotus flowers. Once again, switching the colors up. I sold a number of these at Selby, and I am taking orders if someone would like a specific color that they would think would work well for them. So these are available on a commission basis. These ones, most of them were about, I would say, 4.5 inches wide. I did, when I was working with Jack Grauman, I decided I wanted to make one. These were kind of nice. I thought about making them as tabletop pieces or maybe for a wall installation that I might go back to. But I was talking to Jack and I said, hey, I want to make a jumbo one. So he said, go for it. So I did make one that was the same lotus, but each one of these little flowers or leaves on the lotus was added one by one. So this was something I made this past summer. So this one did end up selling at the Selby Garden exhibition. Yeah, so yeah, it was a lot of fun working with him. We don't get to see each other too often, but when we do, it's always fun. We end up going to work too. Glass blowers, when they're relaxing, they're still thinking about work, and then when they're working, they're still thinking about work. This was actually at Duncan's shop. We did fire up. They have a small mobile unit, and I was trying to think of other ways that I could attach flowers maybe onto another item. I've done them on vessels before, so I was thinking about a dogwood tree that has these very beautiful pink and white flowers. So this is one that I made, I want to say around April this past year. So that's what it looks like. It always looks different when it's hot due to the temperature. So that was after it came out of the kiln. A few shots of some pieces I made out at Pilchuk with Karen Willenbring's class. I made a mask, drawn to demos that she was doing, and also more artifacts going back to my original inspiration. I made the crows before. She showed me some different techniques for color patterns I'm probably going to be revisiting here in the future. So Duncan already mentioned that I was a reciprocant of their residency here at DMG. So this is one of the earlier pieces I made during the residency. I remembered when I was there, it was a 6-week residency. And the first 2 weeks, my process takes a lot of time on the front end. So I didn't really make much for the first 2 weeks because I was focusing on patterns. And I remember they were like, when the heck are you going to get started? So towards the end, a lot of the pieces come together really fast at the end. So this was one of my layouts. And I did have some good shots of this that you could see the process all the way through. So this was named Rising Sun Obelisk. So you saw the pattern. So you can see this was stretching the shape out. So you could see just by swinging the glass back and forth, we could elongate the shape. So a lot of the pieces I was making during the residency, I was trying to push the patterns that I've made before in the past, also trying to push the scale of my work, trying to make it a little larger, and also pushing myself. So that was stretching the piece out. I had Lauren go ahead and help me with this piece here, turning it so we get a better scale of the piece. I think this piece was almost taller than her. So a lot of times I've gotten that a lot as well, that people have seen my work in photos. So my sofa exhibition, for example, I had other glass artists that came through the booth and have seen just an image of it. They're like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. And then they walk by the space and their jaw drops and they're like, oh my gosh, it's huge. So this piece was, I want to say 35 or 36 inches tall. So a lot of the pieces that I was making during this residency were all very, very large pieces, trying to push the scale of the equipment and myself and my team. So it did require a team to make these. Something else that's drawn me to the larger scale work is the teamwork. So this was adding, this was 3 bands of color to the front of a piece that I was making. I wanted to make a giant orb that I was thinking would resemble a coral maybe before it's opened. So it's when it's, I guess if you were thinking of a flower, maybe a closed flower before it opens and blooms. So after adding the bands of color on, inflating it, you can see that a lot of the work was very large.
So Dan, Anthony has a question. He says it's fascinating to learn how you have a workflow figured out before the residency and allocate time for pre-production. That's actually not always the case. I know you're highly organized, but is that the way it usually goes for you? And then Susan also asks, do you know what the final colors are? So as you're figuring all of this out for your residency, are you planning?
Sure. I would say a combination of both. I did have a game plan before I came to the residency there. I had to order color, so I did have somewhat an idea of a palette or style. I also wanted my work to be cohesive. So I did have a game plan to start. I also know from trial and error of doing this over and over again of things that don't work. So a lot of times I would try a pattern and the color would bleed or it wouldn't come out exactly how I wanted. So I found a number of ways of how I apply the colors that will keep the line sharp and also the color very vibrant. So I know some colors that work well and some that don't. So it is somewhat of a trial and error. There is sometimes that you may think it's going to go one way, and then in the chemistry of glass, sometimes the colors can shift or change a little. So there is some wild cards that as the maker, I can't control. It's just the science of the material. But I did have a game plan for a lot of the pieces before I went. Sometimes the shapes of the vessels will change slightly. After I create the pattern, sometimes I'll spend a time working on the colors, working on the pattern exactly. And then later I may think, I have this pattern exactly how I want it. What's the best way to display the pattern? Would this pattern look better on something flat like a plate? Would it look better elongated? So a lot of these taller shapes, a lot of them I thought were nice that they were flattened. So it ended up being, I use the term canvas a lot, that it's a 2-dimensional object almost. It just depends on the shape, so and the pattern. For example, here the blue piece in the center, I knew that the pattern had these large blue windows that were pretty much a circle or an oval. So I wanted to carry that shape on to the piece as well, the shape of the pattern with the shape of the vessel. So you can see the top of the vessel is very bulbous, continuing that rounded shape. What was the other question? Sorry, I got a little sidetracked there.
Well, you've pretty much answered.
Did I answer both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah. So there always is a game plan to start. And then I have my inspiration folder that I look through. A lot of those are photos that I've taken. And then I'll look at those for inspiration for color. And then sometimes I do change the shape along the way, but it is relatively planned out beforehand. So that was last piece was a piece from SOFA Chicago, and it actually sold later through Duncan's gallery. So this was the piece in its home, which I think looks phenomenal. I think my artwork has a better view that I get to look at a lot, but yeah, it's always nice. A lot of times I'll have clients that will email me years later, and they'll say, we had a dinner party the other night and your piece was talked about for the entire dinner. So it's always nice to hear from clients who've purchased something before in the past, and also see my work in its new home. A lot of times I'll make something, it will go to the gallery, and then I'll get a check in the mail, but have no idea where it ended up. So it's always nice to see the piece and hear stories about it later. Being a maker, I make work because I enjoy it, but I also want it to be enjoyed by other people in the world as well. So hearing from people who've received my work and talking about how much they love it, or the conversation that it started, it's always good to hear those stories as well. So this was a photo I was looking at for inspiration for a piece that I made down at Duncan's. And then this was the vessel afterwards. So this was another one that was, I want to say around 30 inches tall. Let's see, I have it. 32 inches tall. So a number of these pieces, some of the ones previously as well, are available. Some of them were sold, like the blue one I mentioned. I know that Duncan does have this one in the gallery. A lot of the pieces from the residency were created, are available either at the gallery, or I have them in my personal storage. So this was something I made that was kind of a shift in my ideas during the residency. So I had a lot of pieces that I were making that were very brightly colored. Like I mentioned earlier, I was thinking about small objects, something like a coral, and how if it was larger, I could see it better. So I started thinking about constellations, something that is very difficult to see, not because of its size, because of its distance, and how that would look closer up. So I made two pieces. Here, the video for scale. Oop, missed it. So two pieces that I made inspired by more constellations in outer space. The first one was 36 inches tall, so over 3 feet. And that is the pattern for the piece in the previous slide. So working down at Duncan's for the residency, it was a great experience. I was very happy. Thank you guys for selecting me, and those of you who donated to the residency. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to come. And then all the work that you're seeing in the slideshow, a lot of this came out of that residency program. So I made a few pieces that were inspired by peacock feathers. So there's also a type of coral that's called Peafowl Batavia, which also mimics and shares similar colors to a peacock feather. So I did make more than one piece at Duncan's that was similar color patterns to a peacock feather. This one was just at the Pinellas show.
It's still up through Monday.
It's through Monday? Yeah, still going to be there.
Yeah, through Monday. Yeah, that's right. At Creative Pinellas in Largo.
So this one is called Radiant Polythoa. It's a 34 inches tall. Most of these larger ones were around 6 inches deep. So it all started about that size. So that was the Marini pattern. Then you build up the color in clear glass and layer. So that was the very, very beginning of the process. And another peacock inspired piece. This one was Duncan's favorite, I remembered from the residency.
And Dan, Anthony asks, the next time you do a twisted piece like this, if you could make a little video about that twist.
Sure. Sure.
We'd love to see it.
Yeah, that's called a switch axis. Yeah, I've do that a lot. And that's something else that I can mention now too, that I am at Duncan's shop permanently now. So any of you who are watching this video currently or in the future, feel free to reach out to me. I am blowing glass there. That's my home shop now. So I am going to be blowing glass on a regular basis. So if you want to know when I'm going to be working or creating something, I'd be more than happy to invite you in. You can watch me work. A lot of times looking at the slides and me explaining it is one thing, but seeing it made is another whole other aspect of making glass. So yeah, if anyone has any questions or wants to see my work or me working in person, just reach out to the gallery or my Instagram or email.
Perfect.
So yeah, there's another reference for scale on that one. And my photographer, lovely Danielle Bauer, taking some shots of my work from the residency. That was a nice trio. So yeah, you can get another aspect of scale with those ones as well.
Thank you so much, Dan. That's amazing. Does anyone have more questions for Dan or would like to unmute yourselves and say something to Dan?
Well, Mary, I had asked about that granularity technique, but he may not have time to tell us about that.
Yeah, I can touch base on that. So the technique granularity, it's an aspect of using a stiff glass and a soft glass together. So a lot of these, it tends to be a stiffer glass, so it will give a very fine fiber. So there's a number of glasses being made now that you can stretch a glass over and over again, and it will give you kind of a very thin fiber or almost hair-like application. So not all colored glass you could do this with. A lot of times softer colors will kind of bleed out or fade away. So the granularity will a lot of times also leave a texture on the glass that is also a very interesting aspect. If it's on the outside or the inside of the piece, if you run your hand across it, a lot of times you'll see it would be almost have bumps. And that's from the colored glass being stiffer than the clear glass in the furnace or another color that you work with. So it's just stretching the glass out over and over again.
It's almost like a feathery, though. Isn't that the feathery look?
It could be depending on how you use it. If you look at a lot of my Marini pieces, I tend to use a very stiff color around the exterior, and I find that some of the larger windows of color look better if they have a border or a perimeter. So I'll use that technique a lot just to create a border for the Marini. So these very fine fibers, sometimes going around the outside. I've also mentioned, I've called it stitching before as well. If you think of like patchwork, that on the outside of the patch, there would be stitching that goes around. These are things that I think of that also translate to the patterns that I'm making. These threads or fibers, sometimes I feel kind of tie the whole piece together.
Dan, what was the name of that hourglass piece in purple and green? It looked pretty tall, almost like 2.5, 3 feet.
Yeah. It was titled Peafowl Batavia. So it's titled after a type of coral. So if you look that coral up online, you can see a number of different variations on that color or on that coral that the colors may vary slightly. But yeah, it was titled after a type of coral.
How tall is that piece?
I want to say 34 to 36 inches.
Wow.
So yeah. So and most of those were around. I'm just estimating here, but around 16 inches wide. The hourglass on the widest part is about 16 inches or so, and 4 to 6 inches deep.
I just looked it up. It's 34 inches.
34. There we go.
Thank you.
And that was Duncan's favorite piece, I think, also.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Duncan has very good taste.
Yeah, a lot of people like
Thanks,
that.
Arthur.
Yeah.
I'm going to call you on that piece, Duncan.
Okay, very good.
Well, thank you, everybody. Dan, you have an amazing and astute vision, a great aesthetic, great skill set. I love so much that you use the beauty of the world and nature all around us, and you translate it into your work. I mean, you're a wonderful example of and you explained very well how an artist uses that inspiration and puts it into their work. Everybody, we've seen what a wonderful range Dan has, and he comes across as such a modest, you know, kind of country boy, right? But it turns out he's been all around the world working with the best artists, and still maintains a really, really lovely personality. So thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Mary. Much appreciated.
Great job, Dan. Thank you very much.
So folks, next week we have a good friend of the gallery of many years, James Wilbat. His work is fun, humorous, light, inspiring, and he's coming to us from outside of Chicago. It'll be a really great visit. And as Dan said, if you can get up to the hot shop, Duncan and the team are doing all the protocols to make it safe and comfortable for you to come and visit. So contact the gallery and make an appointment. We'd love to see you.
Feel free to reach out and ask if when I'm going to be working. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to have anyone come in, and chat about my work or the glass studio or process in general. I'd be more than happy to meet with anyone. So,
thank you. Thanks, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you next week, and have a great weekend. Thank you.